Generally, whenever you have finished a sewing project, you will find that you have random shapes and sizes of leftover fabric. I've been gathering all my awkward pieces left over, and now I'm going to show you how I give them a new lease on life. The idea through this video is to show you a variety of size projects. So say if you've got random pieces that are literally like this small, or whether you've got a decent size left over. Majority of these pieces will just be accessories. So if you're looking more for garments to make for yourself, I will link them below in the description box of this video, of previous videos that I've made that are perfect for little like bandeau tops, wrap skirts, pants, that kind of stuff that you can use for more like medium to larger pieces of fabric. But this is more focusing on the extra small to small, maybe medium sized fabrics left over. Also, they are perfect beginner projects because it's not about trying to fit it to your body. So if you are just wanting to practice, straight lines, working on seams, figuring out how pieces come together, these are all perfect projects to kind of add to your list and tick off. And you'll probably realize even after these, there are still remnants and little awkward pieces left over. So for those like extra awkward and small pieces, I would say those are great to just keep aside for patches if you are wanting to repair something. If they are a little bit bigger, maybe keep them for pockets. You can eventually add them and patchwork them together to create bigger sheets of material as well. If like me, you keep like a little bag full of these pieces, you can potentially down the road keep them for stuffing of pillows, puffy garments, or accessories and whatnot. So as best as you can, always try and hold on to those little pieces, as they might come in handy for other things down the track that you're not really thinking of now, but when you do need it, it's then available. Some of them do just only require fabric and the sewing machine, whereas others you might need some elastic and other little bits, but I will point that out. Okay, now that we have that all summed up, let's get crafty and resourceful. So for the first scrap fabric project that I'll be showing you, you might be familiar if you learnt to sew in high school or something similar, is the classic old pillowcase. All you need is the fabric, the sewing machine, and some matching thread. I am working with, I think, quite a general size one, so you're more than welcome to follow my sizes. If you have a particular pillow that you are wanting to cover, grab your measuring tape and measure either the pillowcase or the pillow itself, then just add 1 inch for seam allowance. If you're adding 1 inch overall, that will end up being ½ inch on each side. So the pillow that I'm working with is 17 inches. I've made this first square panel 18 inches by 18 inches. And that will be my front clean panel. Then for my back panels, there will be an overlapping open section. So there will end up being 2 rectangles for the back side. The width of it is going to be 18 inches, and that will match obviously the front side. Again, if you're working with your own measurements, the way I figured out the height for this rectangle is I divided that total width that I wanted it to be by 2 and then added 3 inches. And that is going to allow for a double hem, or a rolled hem, however you like to call it, on one end. And then also just an extra bit of length where it will overlap. So now that you've hopefully got your 3 panels all cut out, we're going to focus on the 2 rectangles first, and then pick one of the longer edges, and we'll do a rolled hem, which is just doing a double fold of about ½ inch or 1 centimeter each. Ideally grab some pins and pin this fold in place. Once you're happy with that, you can then jump on the sewing machine and sew one line entirely across this section, obviously making sure to backstitch at the beginning and the end. Repeat that for the second panel. Then to join the front and back, we will lay one of the rectangle panels good sides facing onto one edge of the front square, making sure that the folded hem edge is in the center of the square. Lay the other rectangle on top of this, making sure that the good sides of this rectangle is facing the good side of the square. And again, the rolled hem is in the center section. You will find that there is obviously that overlapping section of these rectangles, and that is what we want. Pin entirely around the outer edges, and then we'll jump on the sewing machine and just sew entirely around this square edge, securing all the pieces together. If you haven't turned a corner before, all you do is get to the point where it is about ½ inch or 1 centimeter off the edge, swivel the needle until it is in the fabric, lift up the foot, twist the fabric so it is now facing down the line that you are wanting to sew next, pop your foot back down and just continue sewing as normal. And then you'll repeat this for all of the corners, and when you get back to where you started, just make sure you do a back stitch, and that is all done. And one last note, if you do have a material that is going to fray, I would recommend either overlocking or zigzag stitching all these raw edges that we have sewn, and like I mentioned, that will just help prevent it from fraying. And that is the pillowcase all done. And then I just simply slide it in one side, tuck it in the other. And there we have a cute new pillowcase. That extra seam allowance that we added, it allows a good overlapping amount so that you don't see the inner cushion. Oh, that's so cute. Easy, done, couple of straight lines and we have a new pillow. On to the next project. Before we jump into the next project, I just want to chat about a little way that we can customize these pieces that we have created. And this is using the Cricut machine, who also happens to be the sponsor of today's video. So with the Cricut Maker 3, I was able to add my own personal touch to these DIY projects, as well as the thrifted mugs. It was as simple as setting up the designs within the Cricut design space by exploring their library of graphics, as well as being able to upload my own branding. From there, I sized the artwork to fit the designated area. Then the Maker 3 machine cut out the designs onto the relevant material, which, by the way, this machine lets you create with more than 300 materials, which I thought was cool. So anything I wanted to feature on the fabric went onto Smart Iron on vinyl, which I then weeded out the details, figured the placement, and used the Cricut iron to transfer it onto the fabric. By the way, I have taken these bags with me overseas and on daily adventures, and they're still showing as good as new. Then for the mugs, laptop, and anything else I wanted to customize that didn't require the heat transfer, I just created stickers using the Smart Vinyl. Again, I have used these cups daily for my coffee and have been hand washing them and are still looking great. I am beyond excited to keep customizing my projects with the Cricut Maker 3, as there are all these extra tools to explore which allow features like embossing, scoring, writing, cutting, foiling, perforating, and so much more. This machine even cuts through virtually any fabric quickly and easily, which is perfect if you've got a super specific cut you're trying to achieve, or even help speed up the process of cutting replicas if you're making a lot of the same thing. So I hope this has inspired your creations too. Make sure you check out the Cricut machines and their offers below through the link in the description of this video. And by clicking that, you will be supporting this channel, so thank you for that. And now let's jump into the next project. The next project we'll be doing is a very simple tote bag. Now obviously there are many variations that we can do, but I will just be showing the very basic style. Again, it'll just be the fabric, sewing machine, and some thread that you'll need. Very simple. We'll need to cut out a back and front panel. If you have a particular size tote bag that you like laying around home, you can lay that on your material and trace around it. I would suggest adding 1/2 inch of seam allowance to the 2 side edges and the bottom edge, and add 2 inches to the top edge, as we will be doing a nice folded hem for that. If you just want to follow the dimensions that I have, I've got 19.5 inches high by 17.5 inches wide. Then when it comes to the strap, I personally like mine a little bit longer, so I've made the full length 41 inches, keeping in mind that about 3 to 4 inches of that will get lost in the seam allowance when we attach it onto the bag. So if you have a particular length that you would like your straps to be, just add 4 inches to that for your final cutting length. Then for my cutting width, I want my final strap to be about 1 inch wide. So I've doubled that as we'll be folding it, and then I have added 1 inch of seam allowance, so the cutting width is 3 inches. Again, you can follow that method if you want a different thickness. Otherwise, if you're following along, make the final cutting width 3 inches. That means we should have 2 panels cut out for the main section of the bag, as well as 2 panels for the straps. So when it comes time to assembling this, we're going to start focusing on the strap. We'll fold the strap so the good sides are facing each other and sew down the length of it. Once we've done that for both straps, grab a safety pin and place it on one end and begin to guide this through the inside of the strap, so you are pushing the good sides out the other end. Again, repeat that for both straps. And then just to give it a nice flat, clean finish, we'll flatten out the strap. You can iron this or just flatten it out with your hands or whatever. And we'll sew 2 even lines, ideally as close as you can get to each edge. Mine ended up being about, I don't know, like 3 millimeters off each edge, but I guess that's like less than 1/4 inch. So I sewed that down the entire length of both straps on both edges, and then it was time to start assembling the main part of the bag. again, I'll lay the main panels good sides facing, and if you followed my measurements, you'll see that it is a bit of a rectangle. We want the longest length to be the height of the bag, so we'll sew down the 2 long edges and 1 short edge, leaving one end entirely open. Once you've sewn entirely around this area, I would then recommend to grab a pair of scissors and trim off any excess fabric within this seam allowance, and then zigzag or overlock these edges just to help prevent it from fraying. For an extra little detail, this is optional, I did end up adding a boxed edge down the bottom. To create this, you just focus on the 2 bottom corners, fold it so that the 2 seams are now laying directly on top of each other, and you create a bit of like a triangle. Then measure 2.5 inches from this corner that we have created and mark that equally on both sides, and that will be the line that we sew across. Then just repeat that for the second side, and by sewing across there and creating this boxed finish, I just feel like it helps keep the bag open a little bit, and also if you put it down and you've got stuff in there, it gives it a bit of a base. Again, totally optional, you can just leave it its original rectangle shape. Then we're up to cleaning the top edge and adding the straps on. So flip it so you've got the bag section with the good sides all facing out. If you have a particular side of the strap that you want to show, lay that so it's good sides facing down and match it to the top edge of the bag. I measured in about 4.5 inches from each edge. Again, personal preference, you can follow along what I do or figure out what you prefer, and making sure as you lay both of these ends on the bag that you are not twisting this strap by any chance. Once you've marked that out and you're happy with the placement of it, we'll then just jump on the sewing machine and sew across just the strap section so that they are secured onto the bag. We'll then just repeat that for the second side, and then we'll just be doing one final step of creating a large hem across the top edge. By securing those straps in first, it's just going to allow us to hide and tuck this within the hem, which personally I find gives it a bit more of a secure finish. To create the finishing rolled hem, we'll just do one folded edge, which is about 1/2 inch or 1 centimeter, and then a second larger fold, which is about 1 inch. Flatten this all out and then pin it in place, and then just jump on the sewing machine and sew about 3/4 inch or 1.5 centimeters from the edge entirely around here, so that you are creating a nice clean finish across the top, and then also beginning to secure the straps in place. As you can see, I'm using a contrasting thread. That's mainly just so you guys can see it, otherwise it would blend into the fabric. So you also can use a contrasting thread if you like the look of this. Otherwise you can grab a thread that blends into the color of the fabric you're using. One last final step to just give that extra last securing of the straps, we'll do this X box finishing. So I just flatten that bit of the bag on top of the strap and begin to sew a square around these edges. Then once I've completed the square around there, I do an X through the middle. You might find to complete the X that you need to sew over some existing lines of the square. That's perfectly fine. Obviously the more lines there are, the more secure it's going to be, and that means that we should have a finished tote bag all ready to go. As I mentioned, a very basic bag. You can level it up by adding pockets in there, extra panels. That is so cute. Darcy and I personally prefer the longer straps because when it's on your side, it can obviously hang low, or you can also throw it over as like a satchel bag and it still has plenty of room and sits comfortably. But yes, as mentioned, if you don't prefer that, you can take the extra, I think like 10 inches off it is, and that will be more of a regular size handle. For the next DIY number, we're going to make some banners, and I'd probably say this is more towards the like medium scrap leftover material. What you'll need for this project is the fabric, some dowel or like a rod or something to hang the banner off, some string, and then your trusty old sewing machine. And once again, I'm going to sound like a broken record throughout this video because I say this a lot, but you can customize it to suit any shape or style that you want for around your home, or that you might want to gift someone. Actually, any of these projects are perfect gifts because they're like little, cute, and you can customize them to like suit who you're giving it to. I've made banners that are more triangular. I've made ones that are wider, whereas this one today, just because I'm working with the scrap fabric that I had, I'm making one that is a little bit taller. You can go ahead out and figure out your dimensions, and then just remember to add seam allowance to whatever final height and width you want it to be. I'd recommend starting with a rectangle that is 12.5 inches by 19 inches. Figure out which short edge you want to be the bottom, and we'll find the center of that and plot a dot point there. Then up each side from that same base, we'll measure up 5 inches and pop a dot point on either edge there. and that way we can draw between the bottom dot point and the edge dot points and trim off those little triangular pieces to give us more of like a flag shape. As I mentioned, I'm working with some scraps of whatever I had, so I did end up having to patchwork the back piece to get it to the final height that I wanted it to be, but obviously that'll be at the back, so we're not going to see that sewing line, so just ignore that sewing line if you do see it. Step one of assembling it is you just face the front and the back panels good sides facing. So entirely down the side edge, one of the angled bottoms, the other angled bottom, and then back up that other side edge. Once you've sewn all those outer edges, you can then flip this so the good sides are facing out. You might need to grab something like the edge of the scissors or a paintbrush or something to help push out the corner edges and make them all nice and crisp. As well, if you do find that it is a little bit puffy around the edges, you can grab an iron and iron it nice and flat. Now the size of this top hemmed edge depends on the thickness of the rod that you'll be using. The pieces of dowel that I have are about 1/2 inch or 1 centimeter thick. Ideally, whatever your thickness of the rod that you're working with, double that, and that will be the size of the final large fold that we create. So start off by doing one fold about 1 centimeter or 1/2 inch, and then the second fold will be that height that we determined for the rod to fit through. So for me, that will end up being 1 inch. Once you've got that folded how you want to, you can grab some pins and pin it in place, or just jump directly on the sewing machine and sew one line entirely across this section. If you need to trim down the size of the rod, make sure it at least overhangs by 1 inch on either side. Then for the string, cut out a desired hanging length. Obviously this depends where you're going to hang it around your house or how high or low you would like it to sit. Whatever you figure that out to be, then add 6 inches, and that will allow for a little hoop to be tied at the end so it can go over the rod. And that means your banner is all ready to hang. Now there are ways to customize this and obviously add a bit more personality, because at the moment it's just a plain banner, or unless you have used a pattern material, that is another option. I have added like ruffled sections to create I guess a bit more of like a boho look, also cute messages or graphics over them, especially like I mentioned before, if you are gifting it to someone, you can reflect the person's hobbies or interests that you're gifting it to. The next thing we'll be making is probably on the small size leftover fabrics project, and it is a scrunchie. The one that I have made is very large, as I like my scrunchies to be quite oversized, but I will recommend sizing changes that you can make if you prefer it to be, you know, just like more of a regular scrunchie. So for this you will need some elastic. I went for about the 1 centimeter or 1/2 inch thickness, and then for the length of it I cut the elastic to be 9 inches long. Personally, I find that that fits my wrist comfortably. It allows to tie up a few times, but of course this is very open to interpretation if you want to make yours larger, smaller. If my elastic is 9 inches, I then need the fabric to be 3 times the amount of this plus seam allowance. So 3 by 9 is 27, then I'll add 1 inch of seam allowance, so my cutting length of the fabric will be 28 inches. Then for the width of it, obviously it comes down to how puffy and large you want your scrunchie to be, and I didn't have enough to cut out in one material, so I ended up adding 2 pieces together. For the extended style, I'd recommend cutting your panel at 8 inches wide, as we will end up folding it, and then if you want to go for a smaller, more regular style, I'd recommend cutting it at 6 inches wide. Once you've got your measurements, plot that out on your material and cut out the relevant specs. We'll then fold this panel so the good sides are facing and the short edges are meeting, and then sew along the short edge to create one full circle. Once that is complete, we will then jump into the burrito method of joining the outer edges together. And how you do this is lay it all out so you're looking at the bad side of the fabric, scrunch in or fold that top layer so that you can then fold over the bottom outer edges so the good sides are facing each other. Then you'll notice there is a section where these 2 panels are just facing each other, and that's where we want to sew along. You can either pin that in place or jump straight on the machine and begin sewing along this edge where these 2 pieces meet that are folding over the top of the inner section. These types of things can get a little bit messy and convoluting, but trust me, it all comes together. So sew down as far as you can until you start to reach the little bunched up end where it is starting to get all mixed up, and then begin to pull out the center of the material so that you can then line up the next section, again making sure that you're only focusing on the 2 good sides facing and the rest of the panels are pushed out of the way. Once you've got that next section lined up, sew again until you get to the point where you meet the rest of the material, and you might need to do this like another 1 or 2 times before you begin to see where you have started. And when you do get to that point, make sure you stop about 2 inches or 5 centimeters from that starting point so that we leave a little opening that we can push this all out through. But before we do that, next we're up to preparing the elastic. So grab a safety pin and put this on one end of the elastic and begin to thread it through the inner part of the burrito until it pops out the other end. As you're doing this, make sure you grab a tight hold of one end so that it doesn't accidentally get lost in there. Once it's threaded all the way through, undo the safety pin and maybe just double check that it's not accidentally twisted throughout there. And then we will overlap the two edges by about 1/2 inch each, and then jump on the sewing machine, switch that to a zigzag setting, and just go back and forth over this edge so it joins it and creates a nice full circle. With the elastic being attached or within the scrunchie, it is a lot of bulky fabric that you might need to ensure that it's sitting out of the way and not accidentally getting stuck under the needle and sewn over. Once that is feeling all nice and secure, then it is time to start pushing the scrunchie with the good sides facing out. So go back to the hole that we left open and begin to gently pull out the scrunchie. Otherwise, if you're a bit too rough or if you're trying to yank out too much at one point, you might find that the seams that we have sewn begin to crack open. So just be nice and gentle. It does take a bit of time. It gets a bit bunched up, so just be patient. And then once you've reached the point where all the good sides are now facing outwards, we can go back to that little hole that we have left open. Now you can hand stitch this closed and do it in a way that it is hidden, but I'm just going to jump back on the machine, tuck in the raw edges of the seam and lay it nice and flat and sew a line pretty much as close as you can to the edge, securing this hole nice and closed. I've been using black just throughout these tutorials to show you as it is a bit clearer, but I did switch my thread to a matching thread for this last bit and it blends in nicely. Once you've sewn that line, that means you've got a cute scrunchie all finished and ready to wear around. So that little line you will be able to see, but it is very close to the edge, and if you have a matching thread to the material you're using, it starts to blend in very easily once it's all scrunched up as a scrunchie. I feel like this would be really cute with like a low bun just sitting out as a little design feature. I think I'm going to make another mini one out of this pink one. I'll show you how that turns out. This next project is probably the easiest one out of everything I'm going to show you today. It has 2 uses. It could be a fabric coaster or even a fabric makeup remover, depending on the materials and what you need in your life. And this is actually perfect for those really like extra small pieces that are very awkward. All you need for this is your machine and some fabric. If you're using a coaster, obviously you can use whatever material you like. If you are going for the face wash or makeup remover style, I would recommend using a natural material just because you are going to be putting it on your skin. Obviously cotton is a classic for that. Even if you've got like leftover bits of toweling from projects or even just old towels that you're not really using anymore, they'd all be perfect for this. And all you need to do is grab a bit of paper, cut that out as your template. I have gone for some cute little flower style shapes for this. You could just go a plain old square, hexagons, circles, I don't know, whatever your heart desires. Go and cut out that shape and we can use that as a template to then cut out replicated pieces of fabric. For each of these you ideally want 2 pieces, so cut out an equal amount of shapes and then pair up 2 pieces, lay them on top of each other with the good sides facing outwards, and then just switch your machine to a zigzag setting and literally just zigzag stitch around the edges. Or if you've got an overlocker, you can overlock. Again, you can have a bit of fun with like the colored pairings. I've got like opposite colors on either side. I've also changed the colors of the thread. You can have like a contrasting color, a color that kind of blends in with the material, whatever you think suits your vibe. Again, like I said, very simple number, especially if you are just cutting out like a rectangle. Curved edges and turning corners like this might be a bit of a challenge, but also maybe it is a challenge you want to help push yourself and learn a bit more. And then obviously there's less waste with a rectangle. Now I have a cute little pile of coasters. It's time to jump into the next project. We will be making a cute eye mask. For the scrap fabric size, this is probably like a small collection of fabric that you'll need. Also for sewing ability, I would recommend maybe having a couple of projects up your sleeve because it just has a lot going on at some points. But that's not to say you can't do it. Obviously, if you want to challenge yourself, go for it. You'll need some external material. I would recommend something natural as it will be sitting on your skin and on your face. I think I've just got a cotton linen blend. You could use anything from like silk, hemp, cotton, linen, whatever you can easily access. It's not the end of the world if you can't get a natural material, but it's just a suggestion for not irritating our skin. And then for the inner layer, which is the padding, I just used some toweling that I had laying around off cut from another project. Otherwise, you could use some flannel. I have seen people use reusable padding for this type of stuff as well. You can keep an eye out for that at your local fabric shop. Otherwise, ideally opt for something that will just help block out the light and also has a bit of thickness to it, so it is a nice soft padded fit on your face. And then we will need some elastic for the back section. So to cut out the panels for this, we need some key measurements. First being from the top of our ear, from that point to that point over there. For me, that is 11 inches. We're not going to add any seam allowance to that measurement. My cutting length of the front piece will be 11 inches. Then for the height, I'd recommend measuring from the tip of your nose to kind of like your mid forehead. So for me, that is 4 inches. We'll add 1 inch of seam allowance, so the height of the rectangle that I'll be drawing is 5 inches. Then for the back piece, we will go the opposite direction, again starting at that top of the ear to the other top of the ear, and that is 13 inches. So the elastic we're going to cut at 13 inches, leave that as is, and then the panels that go onto it, I've kind of done a bit of like a scrunchy effect, so that allows the elastic to do its job and stretch out and then put it over our head. So whatever that measurement is that you got for the back, we'll end up doubling it for the length of the panels. The cutting width will end up being 4 inches. Now to figure out this front curvature piece, let's grab a bit of paper, we can use that as a template. We'll draw out a rectangle with those measurements that we found for the front. So mine is 11 by 5 inches. Once you've traced out this rectangle, then we will trim it and fold it in half, as this will allow us to create a symmetrical shape. On the outer edges that are all open, we will pop a center mark there. From the bottom folded edge, we will measure up 1 inch, and then we just kind of draw a curved line that goes from the nose, dips down to the bottom center, and then up to the side center, and then just curve around the top corner and straight across the top. Then you can trim out this shape while it's still on the fold and unfold it, and you will see that it creates a bit of an eye mask. If you hold this bit of paper up against your face, you will find that it is quite large, and that's because it has the seam allowance included in there, so it will end up being quite smaller. So once you've got that paper template, we can then unfold that and begin to cut out the panels of fabric. So we'll need 2 of the external materials. Again, I've got that cotton linen blend, and then 1 for the inner padding. I had some old toweling laying around, so I've utilized that. To assemble it, we will start on the back panels. Now I couldn't cut out one big rectangle to the dimensions that we mentioned, so I had to cut out 4 panels that equaled up to the total length and width. If you're at a similar stage for me, I ended up joining the lengths good sides facing, sewed across, unfolded that. I then laid it good sides facing and sewed down either edge. If you did cut out the full rectangle size, all you would need to do is fold it good sides facing and sew across that top length. We'll then grab a safety pin, pop it on one raw end and push it through the tunnel so that we can expose the good sides facing outwards. We'll unclip the safety pin from the fabric and then pop that onto the end of the elastic and guide that through this tunnel. And obviously, as it is a smaller length than the total of the material, you'll need to scrunch it up to get it out the other end. Once you've got both tail ends meeting the ends of the fabric, I'd suggest sewing a straight line across there so it just secures it in place and we don't lose it down the track. Now that we have that back elastic panel, we're pretty much going to assemble this all in one go. Now I understand this can be a bit overwhelming as there's a lot of panels going on, so if you find that it's too hard to try and line up the external and internal and the straps all at once, I'd recommend doing this extra step before, which is joining the padding onto one of the external pieces on the bad side. So if I was to do this, I would have laid my linen down with the bad side facing up, my filler / padding layer placed on the bad side of that, and then just sewed a single line or a zigzag stitch around the outer edges, joining it together. And that will just help take the headache of it moving around as we join it together. You'll see in the video that I didn't do that, and I'm just noting this because I feel like next time I probably will. It might help. For the sandwiching process, we will grab the outer layer, lay that down flat with the good sides facing up. We'll then grab the strap and lay that down with the outer edges of the straps matching the outer edges of the main panel. Obviously you might need to scrunch up the inner area so that it matches. We'll then grab the other outer layer and then lay that down so it is good sides facing down. And if you haven't got that inner layer attached already, then lay that on top of this. I know it looks a bit questionable and a lot going on, but I promise you it'll all come together. You can pin some key edges in place so it is nice and secure, otherwise we can just jump straight into the machine from here. I would recommend sewing from probably like a few inches above the strap, around that curve, around the whole bottom section, back around up to the other strap, and again about a few inches past there towards the top. Ideally that would leave about 10 centimeters or 4 inches open along the top section so that we can push the inner bunched up sections outwards and reveal the good sides. As you're going around all these edges and sewing it in place, it can get a bit thick, so just take your time, no rush. We don't want to bend or snap any needles. Again, you might find that you need to kind of adjust the material around to make sure that it is aligning each section that you go to, as curved edges can get a bit chaotic when you are sewing it. Once you've gone entirely around that section that I mentioned and stop about 10 centimeters or 4 inches from where you started, we can then begin the process of delicately beginning to pull the inside out. I say delicately because if you kind of just yank it out, you might accidentally rip open the seams that we have just sewn. So do it little bit by bit until you find that it is resembling something like this. And then once you are at this point, you will find that there's an open gap that we need to close up. If you're familiar with hand stitching and you know how to close it in a way that is hidden, go ahead and do that. So I just fold those edges inwards, so just hiding all the raw sections in and aligned with the existing seam that we have created. This line is kind of going to be on display, so to make it look like it's a bit more purposeful and rather than just like a random line, I start sewing a top stitch, I guess you could call it, from pretty much the top of the strap as close as I can to this edge, curving around that corner and then across that top section, again making sure that it is doing the main job that we are here for, which is closing that top hole, continuing across that top line, curving back around until I reach pretty much in line with the top of the strap and then stopping there. Now you can go entirely around this edge and make it look like there is a top stitch across every edge. If that's your preference, go for it. I just find with all the layers going on and trying to curve around there, I'm probably more likely to mess it up, so I'm just preventing that and just sewing this top area. I feel like it looks perfectly fine just having that top edge done, and then that is our mask all done. It looks so cute. I've actually wanted one of these for so long, so I'm so happy now that I have one. I would put it on my head, but I've got some makeup on. I don't want to ruin it literally 5 minutes after finishing making it. So what next? As you can tell by what I'm wearing, the next project that we'll be doing is some simple bandanas. Now there's going to be 2 different ways that we can create them and finish them. This can depend on your preference style or even the amount of fabric that you have left over. The first one is just a very basic square. To figure out the dimensions, we're going to grab the measuring tape and measure it around our head until we meet the back neck section where it will meet and tie up. So no matter what your size is, we're going to add 12 inches onto this measurement, and that's just going to be enough for us to allow to tie up the bottom section and then also the seam allowance. So if mine was 24 inches, my diagonal measurement will be 36 inches. Now to find this diagonal measurement, you can use your scrap fabric and fold it on the right angle until you obviously find the diagonal that reaches this amount. Then once we've got that square, we will just do a folded hem across all the edges. Now each of these folds would ideally be about 1 centimeter or half an inch, and you can pre-pin it or iron it in place before you jump on the machine. I would recommend folding the corners in as you are doing this folding process, just because it helps create a nice crispy corner. Once you're happy with how that's all looking, you can then just jump on the machine and sew the total perimeter of this area. If you have missed some of the earlier projects and you're just skipping to this and seeing the bandana and you're not sure how to turn a corner, when you sew up to the corner, swivel your needle so it is in the fabric, lift up the foot, turn the fabric, and then continue sewing along the next edge. And that is the first bandana all done. I would recommend when you fold it that you leave one edge just shy of fully sitting on top, if that makes sense, and then that overhang edge will end up sitting on the top, and then you can tie it under. I found this style you can even roll up and wear as like a necktie. Many different uses for it and super simple to make. And then for this style, it has less fabric, so obviously this one is a full square, this one is just the half of the square, so a triangle. And for this, again, we'll need to grab that key measurement, which for me was 24 inches, and we'll add 2 inches onto that, so it'll be 26 inches that we're trying to find on the diagonal. Again, if you're working with smaller material, it's probably easier just to fold it over on the right angle until you find that measurement across the diagonal, and then you can just trim up this triangle, and that will be what we'll be working with. You might also see that I have got some contrast binding, which ends up being a bit of like a cute design element, as well as the tie up, which keeps it on our head. So to figure out the length of that, you'll just need to add 12 inches to the head measurement that we found, so my bias binding will end up being 36 inches long. I would personally recommend going for quite a thicker binding. I think mine ends up being about 1 inch when it's got all the folded edges and it's laying flat. So for the 2 outer edges, we'll end up doing the the double folded hem again. I'm just going to kind of breeze over that because I did talk about that in detail before. So again, do your double fold. Once you've done that, you'll probably find there is a bit of a tail end that you can just trim off, and that will just help create that one long extended edge, which we'll be adding the bias binding onto. So find the center point of your bias binding and then find the center point of this edge, and we will lay the binding good sides facing onto the good sides of the material, and then unfold one of the edges so it is sitting in line, and we'll end up sewing along the crease of that folded edge that we just unfolded. Again, you can pin this all in place so it's sitting nice and secure before you jump on the sewing machine, and then we'll just sew one line from the edge of the bandana to the other edge of the bandana, securing the binding onto the piece of material. Then before moving to the final step of closing up the binding, we're just going to clean up the outer edges. Fold these edges so the good sides are facing and sew one line down across this outer edge. Then you can trim up any excess seam allowance and flip it so the good sides are now facing, and you have a nice clean corner, as this will be the end that sits out when you do the tie finish. We'll do that on both ends, and then we're up to the final step of doing the last fold over of the bias binding onto the material, and we will continue that fold all the way down the bias binding to the very tips that we just sewed closed, and that will just help cover up any raw edges that we don't want to see. Now for sewing this, I would recommend starting at one edge of the bias binding, and you'll find as you sew towards the bandana, you'll obviously reach a point that you are beginning to sew over the bandana fabric, and ideally sew it so you are looking at the top or good side of the bandana, and that way you can keep a consistent distance along that seam edge. You'll just need to make sure that you are tucking enough of the bottom edge of the bias binding underneath so you're actually catching it and is securing on there. That's why it's kind of beneficial to have a wider bit of binding, because you can get hidden under there more easily. And as well, I would probably recommend switching to a thread that matches the color of the binding. So for this, I ended up switching my thread to a pink to match the bias binding. So just keep sewing that line until you reach the other end, and that means your bandana is all done. I feel like it's just such a cute detail. And as well, in summer when I'm like going for walks or hikes or swims at the beach, I do find that my scalp gets a little bit sunburnt, and I don't always want to wear a hat, so this could be my alternative. I'm going to make them out of gingham, pastels, more florals. Can't wait for you guys to see me sporting this around all spring and summer and beyond. Now this last project is one that I get requested all the time because it's a very usable accessory as well as the perfect size for those awkward bits that are laying around after projects. And it is a very simple pencil case or makeup bag. It even features a little zip to keep all your things secure in there. So for the fabric size on this, you can totally customize it to a size that you desire or based on the scrap fabric or zips that you have handy. Personally, I had a 10-inch or 25cm zip, so I ended up cutting the fabric at 13 inches wide, and that allows a couple of extras wider than the zip that I have, as well as seam allowance. I also had enough length to do 18 inches long, and that'll end up getting folded in half, and once the seam allowance is gone, it'll end up being about an 8-inch height for the bag. First I focused on attaching the zip, so I laid the good side of the zip facing down. Also with this material you can't really see the good and bad side, but this ideally is where you would face the good side of the fabric to the good side of the zip, and then I just aligned the edge of it with the raw top edge of the fabric. I'll center it and then just sew it across one of those edges. As you can see, I had to kind of undo the zip halfway as the little zip handle can get in the way, so you might find that as you sew along you might need to stop, lift the foot and then move the zip ahead again out of the way. But you can either pin this in place or jump straight on the machine and sew one line across here, making sure that you only start kind of where that finishing buckle of the zip is and where the head finishes as well, and leaving those tail ends on either end just free flowing. Now we've got the zip attached to the one side. To attach it to the other side, we just fold it up so that again the zip is facing good sides down onto the good side of the fabric. Align it with the raw edge, pin it in place so it is nice and centered, and again sew from that buckle edge to where the zipper finishes, and that means the zip is all nice and attached. And we're ready to jump into the next step. We will start closing up the side edges. To do this, keep it all good sides facing and push the zip so the tail ends are all sitting out of the way, and we'll start sewing at that buckle point where the zip finishes on one end and sew across the top edge to the side. Stop about 1 centimeter from that side edge, swivel the needle so it is sitting in the fabric, lift up the foot and then turn this corner and put the foot back down and continue sewing down to the bottom. Now if for some reason you didn't do this in one long fabric and you've had to join a front and back piece together, You could just continue across the bottom and then back up the other edge and along the top. For me personally, I just only have to close the side edges, so I flipped it around and repeated the same process on the other side. Now if I wanted to, I could stop here and just zigzag stitch or overlock the edges and I'd be done on the inside section, but again I want to do the boxed edge finish. I will kind of glaze over this section as I did go into detail about it in the tote bag section of this video, so I don't double up on details. You can scroll back there if you also want to do the box finish and haven't watched that section. Essentially you shift the folded edge so that the side seam and bottom seam are aligned. Measure an even amount from the corner. I personally did 2 inches, and then draw a line between these points and sew across there. Then just repeat that for the second side, and that will help create the box finish. As I mentioned just before, I would recommend zigzag stitching or overlocking before you do this step. I think I got a bit excited and forgot to do that, so pardon my raw edges. Then for the final finishing touch, we're just going to flip this so the good sides are facing outwards. And as you can see, the fabric around the zipper is not covering it how we would like to. So all I've done is just shifted the bit of fabric around the zip up. Essentially you're creating a fold that sits pretty much on top of the zipper and will eventually cover that up. And you'll find that this fold pretty much sits in line with the existing seam that we have created on either side as well. So once you've got that all folded up there, you can iron it or even pin it in place. Then we'll just begin sewing a line across here from pretty much where the zip starts and finishes. Again, my thread that I'm using is standing out here because it's obviously black on a stone colored fabric. Ideally you would use a thread that blends in and you wouldn't even really see this line. Repeat this step on the other side, and that means our pouch slash pencil case slash makeup bag is all done. Anyway, the sun is literally setting. The lighting is probably terrible, so sorry about that. But I hope you enjoyed this little throw together of projects and ideas that you can use for your scrap fabric pieces. If you have any extra ideas of things that you've maybe wanted to make your scrap fabric into, then I can give that a whirl in maybe a part 2. Maybe write them in the comments below. This is very much the tip of the iceberg. There are so many projects that you can do. But hopefully it has inspired some new ways to turn those awkward pieces laying around into cute little things that you can use or even gift. Thanks again to Cricut for sponsoring this video as well. Make sure you check them out through the link below. It's so fun customizing pieces and dreaming up new prints and designs that you can put on your DIY pieces. If you do give any of this a go, don't forget to tag the Essentials Club, as I always love seeing your outcomes. I hope you are having a lovely day wherever you are, and I'll see you in the upcoming videos.